I definitely would not call myself a history expert or even probably a history buff, but I am a history nerd. I love history. I love American history. I love world history. But today we're particularly celebrating a very special time as this is the 4th of July, and we are celebrating America, the United States of America's 250th birthday. And we're going to have a special guest today who's going to talk about some of that. And, well, if you're not into history lessons, I think you're still going to enjoy this. If you're a history nerd like I am, sometimes learning new information, interesting information, fascinating information is worthwhile. So happy 4th of July. Happy 250th birthday, America. And now put on the brakes, grab a cup of coffee, and join the conversation because it's time for a very special edition of Coffee Breaks with Steve. Well, welcome to Coffee Breaks with Steve. I am Steve, and this is the show where we come together around our virtual coffee table each week and join the conversation to talk about interesting topics with amazing guests. And I hope that if you are joining us today, that you're here to participate in a really special conversation around the 4th of July. And you see we have somebody out there, AJ. I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce you correctly, but hi, welcome. And if you are joining us today, do please make sure that you are saying hello, letting us know that you are here and taking part in the conversation as we have the opportunity to all, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, all participate today. Yeah, and we just see our quick comment there from our moderator that this is a moderated conversation. We do ask that you keep all your conversations. Doesn't always have to be exactly onto the things that we're talking about right in that moment. We do ask that you keep it respectful, keep it appropriate. And a day like this, I think this is an opportunity for all of us to just really enjoy a very special celebration. So welcome to everyone. And yeah, it's been an interesting week. It's been it's been a busy week. In fact, I was up pretty late last night doing final touches to get ready for today's show. But hope you are all having a good week. And I'm curious about how some of you out there plan to celebrate the 4th of July, whether it's your regular style of celebration for every 4th of July. Some people just have a special place that they go, maybe to have a picnic, a barbecue, enjoy a fireworks display, maybe go see a parade. And particularly on this one, as we're celebrating, you ready for what this is actually called? The sesquicentennial. And I need more coffee. Rick, help us all out here. Good morning, Rick, by the way. Sesquicentennial, which means 250 years. And today is the 250th birthday of the United States. In terms of the actual publishing and voting on and approving the Declaration of Independence. I get it, like I said, I'm a nerd. I'm not an expert. I'm a nerd when it comes to history. And John Adams, thank you, Rick. John Adams actually, in his writings after this portion of history in 1776, wrote that he expected July 2nd, July 2, to be a day that would be celebrated throughout America's history. Why July 2 instead of July 4? July 4th was the day that they read and voted on the actual Declaration of Independence, the document that we're all familiar with. But it was 2 days prior to that. I'm still not doing well without the coffee. 2 days prior to that, on July 2nd, that the Second Continental Congress actually voted for independence. They made the vote first to say, yes, we do agree that we're going to become independent from Great Britain. And then 2 days later, they voted on the document that Thomas Jefferson and others had worked on that was that actual declaration. And then the first official reading of that declaration took place on July 8th. So we can continue to celebrate for another several days for sure. All right. And again, if you are joining us, do say hello. Let us know that you are here. Whether you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, we are glad that you are here and hope that you will participate actively in our conversation today. I do want to be able to get to that conversation pretty quickly. So we're going to share our sweet and savory today and a few things. I said it's been a busy week. If you were with us last week, you will recall that the show was interrupted. A better term for it would be that the show was hijacked. I had planned, or thought I was planning, to present an episode that Carissa had helped prepare to the charcuterie. Thank you, Shalane. That is correct. Good morning. That Carissa had helped prepare to interview a living mermaid. And before we could even get to that segment, Carissa and Shalane interrupted the show, came in, and what we call ethically kidnap me. It is a process that is voluntary for the person, and it's part of setting up a surprise. And my family was preparing. My birthday was earlier in the month of June, it was about a month ago, but they had been planning this for when family was in town. And this is just a brief shot of me being led into a room where, I don't know, probably about 25 people were waiting to throw a surprise belated birthday party for me. And it was live streamed up until we got into the room and began the party. And part of the reason we stopped then, if you were tuned in last week, was that we did not have releases from all of the people in the room to show them on a live stream or on Facebook or YouTube. And so to be appropriate, to be courteous to them, we stopped live streaming at that point. And I'm not going to show a picture here. We did get some pictures of the entire group. I'm not showing them here, but I just want to say again, thank you. Thank you to my family. Carol did a tremendous amount of planning with the immediate family to set this up. And I'll share more when opportunity permits, but it was a tremendous amount of fun. Thank you to everybody who came. There were people from, I don't know, so many different aspects of my life who were either there or participated remotely, and even people who traveled a fairly decent distance to be there just for this party. So I was very, very grateful, very humbled, had a great time, and I want to say thank you for that. We've continued to stay busy through this week because family's in town. Earlier this week, it was a fun party, Rick. It was, I wish that all of our family, extended family, could have been there, but you were there in spirit, know that. We've continued to have fun this week as we went to, there is a theme park about an hour from here in Idaho called Silverwood. Think of, if you're familiar with places like Knott's Berry Farm that aren't the huge Six Flags or Disneyland types of parks, but they're more like family established, in some cases like Silverwood, still family owned, but just a fantastic theme park that has on one side a bunch of rides, including some great roller coasters, and on the other side, a fantastic top level water park. And we spent the entire day there with family, got quite wet, both riding some of the water rides on the ride side and then getting over to the water park side, and had a lot of fun, as we always do there, an entire day there, and everybody was properly worn out. And then yesterday, several of the family members and I went to nearby Liberty Lake, which is sort of between Spokane proper and the Idaho border. And there are some places there that do zip lining up in the mountain. And we did that. And I'm going to show you a couple, in fact, going to share a couple of, we had a GoPro on Remy. Remy is my oldest grandson. And I'm going to show you a couple of the videos that he took, just so you get a sense for what this was like. So just give us a minute here and watch. This was one of the longer and deeper zipline runs that we got to enjoy. And you're going to hear, it's going to get a little bit loud. If you need to turn your sound down, I tried to control sound, but if you need to turn your sound down when the zip line itself is going, it can get a little bit intense, but just be prepared for that.
knocked my GoPro.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, it's facing my wrist.
Yeah, you can turn around the ladder. It starts. So yeah, just a little bit. Just enough to give you some smack right here.
Yeah, you may have heard Remy mention there. That was one where they warned us ahead of time, as we were, because of the speed and because of the way it gets to the end on that particular run, to move your head to the side so that you don't whack the trolley, the thing that holds you up there when it comes to a hard stop. And Remy did move his head to the side, but the jolt was so strong, you saw that it bumped the GoPro back on its hinge. But that get quite a view there, and I hope you were able to appreciate that. This other video I want to show you quickly is a little bit shorter. It's on one of the shorter earlier runs. Remy was able to set the GoPro onto his own face so you can get his view of himself, or the view of himself while this is running. Anyway, that was a tremendous amount of fun. Thank you to the people at Micah Moon Ziplining for an amazing experience. We had a great time. I overcame I have an issue with heights. And for the most part, the ziplining itself didn't bother me. There were a few platforms, and there's one spot where there's what they call a sky bridge. It's a swinging suspension bridge that you have to go. That's a bit of a ways to get from one of the landing sites to the next takeoff site. And that was probably the only place where my anxiety kicked in a little bit, but fantastic. I would do it again. I would recommend it. It was just a fantastic time. Got some birthdays coming up this week that I want to mention. First of all, I just want to mention that, of course, we know what today is. This is the 4th of July. It's America's 250th anniversary, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. I hope you are celebrating today if you are in the United States, and please do feel free to let us know how you celebrate and how you plan to celebrate today. A couple of birthdays I want to mention. Christina Crick, I was with the Sabre 6 Foundation. The executive director has been with us before on this show, is celebrating a birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday, Christina. And then Kate White, another dear friend who has also been on the show, an actor, voice actor, nurse, is celebrating a birthday in a couple of days on July 6th. So happy birthday to Kate. Do you have a special day coming up this week? Do you have one coming up in the near future? If you got one coming up this week and you want to make sure we celebrate with you, please feel free to put that in the chat right now. It can be a birthday, an anniversary, anything that you feel is special for you that you'd like us to acknowledge and celebrate. And by the same token, you got something coming up later in the month of July, or later this year, that you would like us to get on our calendar so that we can celebrate with you when the proper week comes along, you can send us an email to cbwsteve@comcast.net. We'll get it on our calendar, and we'll make sure that we do call you out and celebrate with you when the time comes. All right, listen, I want to get to our conversation, already running a little bit behind time because I got busy talking about ziplining. But I want to tell you a little bit about our guest and then let you enjoy this really cool conversation and a little bit of a history lesson, if you will. Don't let that scare you away. Jim Cowie is a living historian and historic weapons demonstrator based in New Orleans, Louisiana, with experience presenting at museums, state parks, and national battlefields in Louisiana, North Carolina, Alabama, Florida, and New York. His interests are privateering and piracy, the French and Indian War, the American Revolution, and the War of 1812. Currently, he uses typical Continental Army attire and weapons to describe how those items were sent from France up the Mississippi River under the Spanish governor Bernardo de Galvez to the rebels led by George Rogers Clark fighting the British in what was then known as the Illinois Campaign, and later sent up the Ohio River to the American United States throughout the war. Little hint and preview about what you're going to enjoy. And I think you will enjoy Jim, and I think you will enjoy this. So please do participate in the conversation. Here's the conversation with Jim Cowie. Jim, welcome to Coffee Breaks with Steve. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Well, sir, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I'm looking forward to telling people about something that not many people know about, and
That's
something that happened a long time ago that actually fits real well into America 250.
That's why we're here, and I love that. As we get ready to share that, Jim, I wonder if you can just talk a little bit and share a little bit about yourself and your background, what led you to be such a, I'm going to use the word nerd about history because I'm a nerd about history too, but just share a little bit about where you came from and why this kind of thing is so important to you.
I've always enjoyed history, especially the Revolutionary War. And when I retired as a school psychologist and an administrator in 2015, the National Park Service was looking for people to do programs with children. And I thought, I could do that. And then they called and said, we'd also like you to participate in what's known as black powder, which is demonstration of historic weapons, pistols, muskets, and cannon. I said, sure.
Wow.
So I've been doing that for 11 years. And what would happen every year is that you always brought in other park rangers to help supervise for safety purposes. And I would end up being the aide de camp working with those people. So think of it this way. I was the Marquis de Lafayette for those days. And
Okay.
what then happened was those individuals would invite me to come to their parks and for the same purpose. And I started going around the state and the country doing all the things that I do. Now I work in about 7 different locations.
You yourself live in Louisiana.
Yes, sir.
And a lot of what you have the opportunity to talk about and to share with other people has to do with Louisiana history and with the Revolutionary War era, but other eras as well. What is it that we sometimes, I think, overlook about Louisiana's role in some of that early history?
Well, first off, Louisiana history is American history. We were the frontier for a number of years. We had numerous governments. We learned self-government. We learned self-reliance. And we also learned how to make America a better place. Now, it's not to say that everything was perfect here, because it sure wasn't. But that's kind of where I started with it, was to say this is really who we are.
One of the names that appears in that history around that time is Bernardo de Galvez.
Yes, sir.
And I'm curious about why he is really an important figure that maybe, one of the most important figures that many Americans have never heard of.
Right. Understandably. Bernardo Galvez is the governor of Louisiana. He's a very young man. He's very active. And what's occurring is that the way that the colonies had been organized, because after all, Spain attains Louisiana from the French, but the British actually get a slice of that. And as you might suspect, that relationship is not very positive. Galvez recognizes, at the request of the King of Spain, that the colonists or the rebels are in need of supplies. And while the King of Spain is not interested in actively supporting the Americans per se, he is interested in helping them beat the British. So Galvez begins to allow supplies to go up the Mississippi River. And George Rogers Clark and others end up being the recipient of all that. And it's kind of what I'll do is I'm going to turn the camera just a little, and I'm going to show you what we're talking about here. This is what they're sending. French uniform, French hats, French guns. And that's a gorget that they use sometimes to bribe people with. And the British can't figure out how this French stuff's getting in the country, because they have Canada, obviously, and they have all the East Coast all blockaded. And when that happens, they realize, oh, they're coming up the river. So they decide to attack New Orleans. Galvez, who's one of his skills is he has more spies than, probably any American president ever dreamed of, finds out about it, and he decides, oh, and guess what? I'm going to attack you first. And it leads to has all kinds of ramifications for the American Revolution.
So we talk about this unsung hero.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to leave it to you to share.
Okay. Bernardo Galvez is born in Spain, and he's a member of a very prominent family. His uncles and fathers are also very prominent leaders here in the New World. Now, he doesn't live a long time. He dies in 1986 in Mexico City. There's always been questions about that, but I really think he ended up dying of typhus. Now, here's what America looks like in 1763 in North America. And as you can see, the British have control of the eastern shore and of Canada in the north. A lot of it is somewhat Native American. And the tan there is what the Spanish have. Now at the bottom, you'll see that the British have a colony known as British West Florida. Not a lot of people live there. It stretches from the eastern shore and just north of New Orleans all the way to the Chattahoochee River in Florida, or if you live around here, halfway to Disney World. It's only to the 31st parallel. It's not terribly big. There's about 1,400 people who ever live there, but they have several forts along the Mississippi. He created that colony. That's what it looked like. There aren't even many soldiers there. Now, when the British took control of it, they did allow any non-English speaking people to move to Spanish Louisiana, and that did occur. Now, when Galvez arrives here in Louisiana in 1777, he's faced with a bit of a problem. Now, the picture is actually the Cabildo, which is the seat of Spanish government. The previous governors of Louisiana from the Spanish side have not gotten along well with the French natives. They perceive them as trouble, and a couple of them actually run out of town. Well, Galvez has some advantages. First off, he speaks French and Spanish, which makes it easier for the people to like him because he speaks their language. I'll also throw something in there and say he's a bit on the Jeffersonian side, has probably studied a lot of information about the Enlightenment, all that, the things that Jefferson did, the common man that went on. Mm-hmm. And he also marries the daughter of a very prominent French person in Louisiana. In fact, we have two parishes here in Louisiana called East Feliciana and West Feliciana, named after his wife. So he managed to make himself friends real easy. Now, the next thing he does is he brings a group of people to Louisiana who are known as the Isleños. And that means they're from the Canary Islands. They're brought to Louisiana because Galvez and others are concerned that the eastern part of New Orleans, which is, where the swamp is vulnerable to attack, and he wants to have someone there to try to stop them. They continue to live in St. Bernard Parish, which is east of New Orleans. That's where Chalmette is. And they're very proud of their heritage and their culture. They have a big celebration every year. I usually go. It's wonderful to watch. Food's good. And they also become very important in Galvez's militia. In 1776, the American Revolution commences. As I said, the King of Spain is, I don't think, too concerned about the Americans, but he'd love to nail the British, so he does. And they start sending stuff up the river. And it goes primarily to George Rogers Clark as he attempts to control what's known as the Northwest Territories. What does he send them? Guns, hats, uniforms. Now, if you'll notice, there's a little red sticker on that pistol. Okay? That is typically what you would have found on what we refer to as the cockade, or the little thing on top of your hat. If that was red, that was deference to the King of Spain. If you happen to be in French territory, it was actually blue and white because you were deference to the King of France, but that's how you knew whose side you're on.
Okay.
Obviously, the war does not go well at first for the colonists. You know, they're taking it pretty bad. In 1777, the only way to get from Canada to New York City is by what's known as the United Carry or the United Trace. And if you look at a map of New York, what you'll see is you have to go down the Wood Creek from Lake Ontario, cross over at the United Carry, get on the Mohawk River, paddle down to the Hudson, and then go to New York. Well, the British decide that if they take that area on their way to Saratoga, they will cut off the northern part of the colonists because most of the activity is going on in Boston. Now, Fort Stanwix has been there for a while, and the British don't know the Americans have taken it over. There's a 3-week siege that includes a pretty bloody battle at a place called Oriskany, and basically the British are forced to withdraw because they have a fair amount of Native American assistance, and the Native Americans really take it pretty badly at Oriskany, and their response is, we don't have a horse in this race, so they leave. Because that general, or colonel rather, who's known as St. Leger, cannot make it to Saratoga, that's Washington's first victory. It's pretty much the turning point in the war. France and Spain formally declare war on Great Britain at that point. Now, General Campbell, who's the commander in British West Florida, receives orders to attack New Orleans to stop the flow of supplies. Galvez learns that and starts his own campaign against the British. What happens is that he travels up the Mississippi, and the first victory is at Fort Richmond, which is present-day Baton Rouge, in 1779. And as a result of that, Galvez is now promoted to general in addition to being governor. He then goes east, attacks Fort Charlotte, which we know is present-day Mobile, in March of 1780, and then goes to his famous place at Pensacola in May of 1781. Now here's where you see his military abilities. He has some spies, some of which are actually colonists, who have visited Pensacola, and they talked the commander into showing them his brand new cannons up on the mount there. The general says, okay, and proceeds to fire the cannons to show this guy, who's probably Oliver Pollock, who's been supplying us, and come to find out the cannons are in the wrong place. They will not hit a ship that comes across Pensacola Bay. Galvez is aware of that. When he decides to attack, the Spanish Navy is not sure they believe him, but he says, and I quote, "I alone will go." And he boondoggles a ship and sails across Pensacola Bay, and the British are fired at him, and they ain't gonna hit nothing. So the rest of the Navy follows, and it begins a siege. Now, when that happens, the British are in a terrible position because they're pretty much cut off. And then one day, while the Spanish are trying to get fortified, there's this huge explosion. And it turns out that the British accidentally have blown up their own powder magazine. So he surrenders. When that happens, Spanish forces then attack Nassau in the Bahamas and conquer it, but Galvez is not in charge of that, and I don't think he even approved it. When he gets done with that, he and the Marquis de Lafayette get together and decide that their next situation should be to attack Jamaica. And the reason for that is Jamaica is where the British are making their money in the New World because of the sugar. And but he's all set to do it, and it would have been a victory. Now, Galvez has an interesting series of troops. He has Spanish regular army, which has come from Spain and then also through Havana. Spanish naval forces, who've also come to Havana. Local militia, including free men of color, which was common during the Spanish occupation or governance, that an individual who may have come here as a slave could earn his freedom through work and also through money, which he was paid for. And he had a fair amount of those individuals helping him. In fact, I have actually talked to people, descendants of that group, and they're quite proud of the fact that their folks now participate in the Sons of the American Revolution
yes.
because they did serve with Galvez. Now, originally, they weren't. In fact, nobody who served with Galvez ever made that because they weren't perceived as American soldiers. But slowly but surely, his contribution has been acknowledged, and they now participate in the SAR. Now, Galvez is the kind of guy that didn't stand there and, drink coffee and make do stuff. When they were walking through the swamp, Galvez was standing right there with them, and they respected him for that. Now, here's a picture of what artillery would have looked like back then. The picture on the left is a British howitzer and also, howitzer and a mortar, which you would use to shoot up and over a fort. You would not use it to attack, the wall of the fort. But you could set that on fire and zip it in there. In fact, the British managed to do that at Fort Stanwix. They do hit one of the magazines. Unfortunately, they also hit the only pregnant woman in the facility. She did recover, and the baby was fine. Now, the cannon on the right is a Spanish cannon from the era. It has what we call a garrison carriage, which means they would have put it on a ship or in a fort because that thing was so heavy you couldn't move it. Now, that's what you would pull down a fort with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the British would, and basically every country had its own cannons, but they're all interchangeable because you could, when you took a fort, you could steal his cannon. Same thing happened with cannonballs. You could fire back at them because everybody had the same size.
Yeah.
That is what a Spanish soldier would have wore in 1778. That gentleman is actually Stephen Estefano, who's listed as one of the contributors here. And he knows quite a bit about this. And the Spanish would, of course, wear linen uniforms. And so they were cooler. That's the reason I'm not wearing that wool thing today.
I don't blame you.
I put it on. I wore it last week for about 3 things, and I had to take it to the dry cleaners. Now, this is Jamaica. This is where Galvez is going to go. Mm-hmm. And had he done that, that would have been a severe blow to the British. Mm. Now, of course, the war ends, and I'm sure some of the reason that it ends when it does is because I think the British are aware that that attack is about to occur. Now, I don't know for sure, but $20 says Galvez sent him a letter and told him he was coming because he didn't think that way. Okay. Now, by 1792, we have a brand new America, and a lot of the things have changed, and the colonists of the new country exists, but not everywhere. And slowly but surely, America begins to move westward. Yeah. And that's going to eventually lead to the Battle of New Orleans. Now, here's his accomplishments. The guy's very busy. Now, again, he is pretty much a product of the Enlightenment. He's very much into respecting people, to not necessarily assign like the person based on their heritage or their honors. The family's also made a count, and he's eventually promoted to Governor General of most of New Spain, and he ends up in Mexico City. Unfortunately, that is where he develops typhus and dies as a relative young man, which is kind of a shame because we don't know what he would have done. We do know that he had to be careful because when he was in Mexico City, he was out doing something and they were dragging some guy that they were going to hang for whatever he did, and Galvez basically commuted his sentence right then and there, but didn't ask the king. So he had to kind of tiptoe past the king, and the king let him do it. But that was not the sort of thing that was going to get you positive in the Spanish area.
Right.
Mr. Galvez is acknowledged by George Washington and the Continental Congress, in 1783. And in about 2014, he is made a citizen of the United States and declared a hero of the American Revolution. This portrait that you see is actually hung in the Senate Foreign Relations Room of the United States Senate.
Wow.
And what I then did is put a list of all the Rangers and people who worked with me
Yeah.
all throughout the last 11 years.
That's great.
Learned a lot of Chalmette. In fact, many ways, one of the reasons I got involved with Galvez was when I went up to basically St. Francisville in Louisiana Parish, we did the Battle of Baton Rouge reenactment. And one of the things I learned was a lot of the things that he's involved in and happened in 1777 through 1781 are going to be repeated in the Battle of New Orleans.
Wow. Yeah.
There's the same issues are going on. That the British come and they want to take New Orleans for exactly the same reason. And this time, instead of Galvez, they run into Andrew Jackson, who's not likely to quit. So that really fit well in my head because when I was up at Fort Stanwix, and I go there quite a bit, they were always talking about what happened afterwards. And as I started to do the Galvez stuff up in Baton Rouge, it occurred to me that one is a direct result of the other.
Right.
And I thought that was an interesting connection between two parts of the country that you wouldn't think had anything to do with each other, but really they do.
Yeah.
And I started telling people, the reason that this becomes important from Stanwix and Saratoga is that the British suddenly realize they have to remember a little place called New Orleans, which is great because that's where I live.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was neat to tie all that together and to realize how that's really a linear connection.
Yeah, that's cool. That is really cool.
All right. And I have here, and I'm going to list my email address. If someone wants a copy of this, these are all the things that I read about that and made sure that I knew what I was talking about.
As we are celebrating America's 250th birthday, why do you think it's important for us, regardless of our age, to really understand the full story of our nation's founding?
Well, I was going to bring that up.
Okay.
One of the things that I do is I ask questions during my, presentations to people about the Constitution and also about Fort McHenry and the Star-Spangled Banner.
Yeah.
I get 29% correct. People have not learned it. And if you look carefully at the Constitution, what a great document it really is.
Yeah.
And there's also evidence of the Iroquois, the Six Nation Confederacy up in New York, had a similar document, although it wasn't quite as written up as ours was. And I think if you don't understand just how unique that really is, you won't understand. It's like you don't realize what you have here.
Yeah.
And this is what we accomplished. Probably for the first time in at least the European world, somebody could govern themselves. They didn't need it. We didn't. We could make our own, which I think is one of the lessons of the revolution is that if you have a desire and a will and a willingness to do what you got to do, you're going to win, and you're going to end up with a new government. Yeah. And I think that's a lesson that people need to understand.
So, one question as we're celebrating our 250th birthday as a nation, what are you going to be doing for this particular Independence Day?
Okay. Actually, I'm headed up to Fort Stanwix, and they're going to read the Declaration all day. I don't know if they'll ask me to read part of it. And we're also going to fire the cannons in celebration of that. And that's a big deal for those people up there because they really take it seriously. And we're going to say, this is what really happened. And this fort that exists in the middle of town is there for a reason. It wasn't just because you get funding for it. And this is kind of how we ended up where we are.
Yeah, that's cool. If you could, as we wrap up today, and we are going to share information from you, contact information, and some additional information that people can look up, including some of the things you referenced in your presentation. But if you could leave our viewers with one thought as we are celebrating America's 250th birthday, what would it be?
Thank the soldiers who did what they did and the colonial leaders who did what they did. The book that is fascinating to read is actually Drums Along the Mohawk, which describes what I see in florid detail. It's like, this is what these people experienced and what they ended up with and what they went through. And I mean, it's right there. There really is a Mohawk River, and there really was that battle. And to just take a moment and say, look at all the things we have because these people did what was right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jim Cowie, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and to help us celebrate our nation's birthday. And thank you for what you do regularly, what you do on an almost daily basis to bring history alive and to help others gain the same passion for it that you obviously have. Appreciate it.
And thank you for doing what you do, because putting this out there helps a lot in a lot of ways.
Good. Well, thank you once again, Jim Cowie, for, again, I don't know if this resonates with everybody who might be tuning in, but for me, this kind of reflection on history and learning things that I didn't know about previously is so worthwhile. And I think particularly on Independence Day, on our 250th birthday as a nation, it's really cool to be able to do that. I know we're short on time here. I want to share a couple of things that are coming up. And I want to just let you see a few of the things that we have happening on Coffee Breaks in the coming weeks.
Music is a vehicle for memory like none other. I mean, how many of us have had the experience of hearing a a childhood lullaby or song, or, a song that we heard in our teens. And it suddenly brings us back right to the scene where we first heard it, right? And we go, oh my God, I forgot about the song, or I forgot about that moment in time or that person I was with, right? And it has this power to evoke within us. And music is a language unto itself.
Event days are just like when the cake comes together, right? And the event masterpiece finally comes together. You're working diligently on it for months and months and months. And then when the day happens, you get to really follow this set script and guidelines so that by the end of it, you can breathe and be like, that was amazing. It happened. And to some people, it's not fulfilling. Frankly, it's one day, right? Or it could be a 3-day conference or anything. And afterwards, you're like, why did I spend so many months on that? But really, for me, it's most fulfilling because I know that people, the memories that they create at events last a lifetime.
How prepared are you if an emergency happens tomorrow? We all hope we never have to put an emergency plan into action. But if you suddenly had to evacuate your home, would you know exactly what to take? Do you have a checklist ready? An emergency kit? A plan that everyone in your family understands? And what if the emergency meant staying home instead? Would you have enough food, water, medications, and supplies to safely shelter in place for several days? On this episode of Coffee Breaks with Steve, we'll explore practical steps you can take now to prepare for the unexpected. There are trusted resources, helpful planning tools, and simple ideas that can help you and your family be prepared, not panicked. We'd also love to hear from you. What topics would you like us to cover? Who would you like to see as future guests? Send your ideas anytime to cbwsteve@comcast.net. And if you enjoy Coffee Breaks with Steve, please help us grow the conversation. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you're already a subscriber, share it with your friends, family, coworkers. Hey, even the people you meet while waiting in line for coffee or at the grocery store. Every new subscriber helps us reach more people with conversations that inform, encourage, and inspire. All right, thanks for continuing to stick with us. I just want to end with one final thing. Over the last month, each month Coffee Breaks with Steve selects a nonprofit organization that we want to promote and highlight and encourage you to look into. And the month of June, which has just concluded, we were promoting and focusing on an organization called Broader Than Broadway. And even though the month ended, just because we didn't get a chance to do a promotion last weekend with everything that happened with the episode, and actually I had a previous weekend in June when we were gone, when we did not have a show. And so I felt like we needed to do one last really push and promotion for this wonderful organization. And I'd like you to stick with us for just another couple of minutes so you can watch this brief video about Broader Than Broadway. Broader Than Broadway really is a fantastic organization. If you had tuned in a couple of weeks ago, you had the opportunity to meet and hear from its founders, Chrissy Whitehead and Alexis Carriger-Base. And you can go back and find that episode and learn more about it. And we are putting the link one more time to the Broader Than Broadway. You see it there on the screen. There's a QR code, and we're also putting their website here. And once again, just want to say thank you, excuse me, thank you to Jim Cowie for taking the time to join us to talk about U.S. history. Yes, there are a lot of challenges, definitely. I agree with that. But we have a history that is worth knowing about. We have a history and a heritage that is worth protecting. And as you celebrate this 4th of July, you celebrate our 250th birthday, I hope you have something to focus on regarding this country that helps you think about how we can continue to make that history and make that heritage something that we can focus on, something that we can teach to future generations. That's important. Whatever it is that you're focusing on today, I just hope that you will also look ahead, find ways to use your voice, use your hands and feet, use whatever you have available to touch lives, to do whatever you need to do to reach out, because remember that you can find a way to make a difference in your world this week, and I hope you will. God bless you. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Coffee Breaks with Steve.